welcome to the candidate conversation with Joanne Hardesty and AJ McCreary. I am Shayna Pomerantz, host of Race Talks, and I'm joined here with Mr. Bruce Broussard of the Voter Digest. I welcome our candidates for this amazing conversation. This is a Race Talks event where we focus our conversation on race, the substance, nuance, and beauty of race, along with the burdens and threats of racism. Other candidate forums and conversations may be race neutral or race invisible. We are not. Race Talks does not endorse candidates, and we host these conversations as a means to talk about important issues of race with candidates who will influence policy and the rule of law for all Portlanders. The purpose of this conversation is to highlight this landmark moment of two Black women running for separate city council seats in Portland, Oregon. It also speaks to a growing dynamic of Black women running for office and being appointed to high levels of leadership in our country. Understanding that Black women are constantly criticized, attacked, and still held to a higher standard than their white peers, we host this conversation to allow both of these candidates to introduce themselves to Portlanders in an environment where they can be relaxed and speak from their hearts. Each candidate should keep their responses to 2 minutes. This allows us to get through more questions and allow people to hear your perspective on important issues. It also affords more of a dialogue exchange if follow-up comments are desired. This is a conversation, not a debate. It is okay to agree or disagree. The goal is to not have either party dominate the conversation, rather share their viewpoints and give people a sense of who they are and, if elected, how they would work together. Because this is Race Talks, we use something called the Race Talks ground rules and progressive stacking order, which we've already shared in our intro and with our candidates, and they've agreed to. So without further ado, we are going to get started in this conversation. And so I just want to welcome Joanne and AJ. I'll kick off the first question, give you about 2 minutes each to respond. We'll have a loose timer, so that way we can get through more questions. So the first question is, this is a discussion rooted in race and focused on personal experience, and it relates to race while living in Portland as a community leader, public official, and candidate. How have you navigated racism in Oregon?
Well, I'm happy to actually give you a partial answer. Let me just say that I was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and the population I was born and raised in was 80% Black. And so my experience in Portland coming here in January of 1990, I actually thought that there were maybe 7 Black people that lived in Portland, that they would kind of rotate throughout town. I will say that there are expectations of African Americans that are uniquely African American. As you may know, the history is as it has been dictated what part of town Black people can live in the city of Portland. Until I was elected in 2018, there had never been a Black woman elected to Portland City Council. And that was like 146 years before I showed up. And it is clear that there's this expectation of Black women that they should be soft-spoken and acquiesce to male power dominance. And I'm neither of those things. I'm like pretty direct, and what you see is what you get. So my experience in Portland has been pretty mixed. But I think the only reason I last in Portland as long as I have is because I grew up in a community that was predominantly Black. So when I moved here and people started talking about minorities, I looked around to find out who they were talking about. And somebody said, "Oh, they were talking about you." But I've never felt like a minority, again, because I've lived all over the world. I grew up in a very Black environment. And so I think that's helped me to navigate in ways that many professional Blacks who come to Portland don't last past the first couple of years.
I was born and raised in Portland. I really appreciate that, because that perspective is really good. And it also is really helpful because it is really heavy here, and it's, it's different. I was born and raised here. My dad's Black, my mom's white. So I come from a very different perspective of really straddling that line and seeing these very different communities and how things operate. And I went to college, or I started college in New Orleans at Xavier University. And then as an adult, I lived down in New Orleans with my son. And so I think having that experience of away in a very different community around race has really helped me shape sort of my perspectives and the way that I move through, and also will push back. You'll see a lot of my work is carving out space for Black and brown folks. EGC, Equal Giving Circle, we hold space in a variety of different ways for people. And living in Louisiana, you don't have to carve out space like that, because you can just go to an event. It's just going to be Black folks, of all shades of Black folks, of different demographics within the community. But here in Portland, because it is so white here, and the community also so fragmented because of gentrification and waves of gentrification, is different. So being so light, I use that privilege with a lot of intention, and I was raised intentionally to be like that, and to be a loudmouth, or to be a maverick, to be a disruptor. I take that both seriously, and I have a lot of fun with it. I'm not afraid to call people out, or I'm not afraid to push back. It's probably why I didn't get the Oregonian endorsement. I called them out for their racism in real time, and I felt great about it. I was just like, what am I doing here? How dare you say these things? So for me, it's really, it's intentionality around pushing back. And I think because I'm able to be intentional, it really helps me navigate that space, being from this community and navigating race in Portland in the way that I have. I think that lends to a lot of benefit in City Hall, just because I have a unique perspective, and because I both understand a lot of the systemic stuff, and as well as cultural from both sides. And being able to understand culturally from both sides helps me navigate these conversations and these experiences. And Portland's super racist. And if it's super racist for somebody as bright as me, dear God, like that's very, very, very scary. Just to think on a broader perspective, a broader, way.
Question. I have a follow-up because you both mentioned being Joanne, you're born in Baltimore, which is kind of the northern South. I mean, it's that right at that Mason-Dixie line. AJ, you've been in New Orleans. And so one of the things that there's a lot of conversation around is, one, the intergenerationalness of how we come together as a community. You both are coming in as two spectrums of generations, how you come into this work, but also colorism plays a factor in how we are perceived in our Blackness and how we navigate the world as Black women. And so I'm wondering if I can just have you expound a little bit more about your experience around ageism, colorism,
Threads, right? Hairstyles, all of it, right?
Brown Act, all the things. Yes.
Yeah, all the things. I mean, honestly, I am of the generation where they told us that if we, dress like the corporate people and look like the corporate people. I mean, I'm of a generation where my mom would be horrified by my hair, right? Because it had to be straightened. And it had, there's a certain look that my parents' generation expected of their kids. And I rebelled then, and I still rebel now. But I think there's something about actually just being confident in your culture and who you are. And I can tell you, being a dark-skinned Black person, Black people were more vicious than white people ever were when it came to colorism. And so I walk with I know who I am, and I'm old, and I'm not changing, and people either like it or they don't, and that's okay with me, right? But in my position at City Hall, it has been my first month here. I had a white woman go running, crying from city council chambers because I was allegedly abused her. And here's how I abused her. I said, can my daddy rent an apartment from your administration, since you run the biggest rental apartment building in the Portland metro area? And she tried to deflect the question. And I just kept saying, I'm sorry, maybe you didn't hear the question. And I repeated the question with my big smile. And the next thing you know, she welded up with tears, went running from the city council chambers. The mayor staff ran behind her. And the mayor looks at me and says, "We will treat all guests at these chambers with respect." I went, "What? Was I disrespectful?" Right? The very next morning, 3 white women came in to testify at communication. All 3 accused me of bullying this poor woman who was afraid to testify at City Hall. And I just bullied and browbeat her. And so when they were done, I took a moment of personal privilege to just remind people that I was elected by over 60% of the voters. And voters actually expected me to come to City Hall to ask questions. And I would not be silenced by white women tears into not asking the questions that I knew my community wanted answers to, right? And I'll tell you, that just shut it down right there. After that, it was fine, right? Had to do that with white men a little while later, but that's another conversation.
Good answer. Good answer.
AJ?
I'd say, navigating colorism. I mean, it's definitely, people have a lot of questions. Up here in the Pacific Northwest, I think it's light-skinned people are more likely to pass and just try to not engage. That's not my vibe, and that's not how I was raised. And I'm very proud of my heritage and who I am. So it is also about confidence. And also just, I think, really knowing myself, both when it comes to race, when it comes to, my gender. I actually was told at the beginning of this journey for me to tone down my gender. And I was like, whoa, but I'm a mom. And that's horrible advice. Also, do you over there? That's I reject this.
How do you tone down your gender? I wouldn't even know how to tone down the gender. What does that look
How does
like?
that work?
I literally was like, can we shut down this conversation? There's nowhere to go from here. I don't really know what to do. And I think the same way around age. I love working with different generations. On this campaign trail, I've gotten some really great advice from folks within the silent generation. I've had a ton of people in the boomer generation that have been rallying support and showing up for me. I would say exactly the same thing for Gen X and millennial and Gen Z. I have 2 paid staffers on my campaign that are youth. One's 15, who happens to be my kid, and the other is 17. And I love working with different folks. I think there's a lot of growth, and I think there's a lot of, it's important. I wouldn't be in the space that I am professionally if I didn't have mentors of different generations, and legit, I do. Some of the first people that I call when I'm stressed out, whether it's personally or professionally, are, people in their 60s and 70s. You know what I mean? So I think there's just there's a lot of strength and beauty in just leaning into this is who I am, and this is what it is. And in this space, it's also, you're expected not to. I lean back to that advice of tone down your gender. And I'm just ooh, that is the exact things I don't want to prescribe to. I want to be who I am. And I also know that people have supported me through Equal Giving Circle, support me through, Mom Block, support me, just with the art stuff that I've done, and do support me as a mom, and have supported me as a candidate because they know, I know who I am, and that I am authentic in that, and that I have no problems pushing back, and just, that's not something we have to worry about. There's other things that we can, focus on. So I think there's a lot of beauty and strength in being confident, knowing who you are, and also just really not getting out of that. I'd say being a millennial, I think there's some really great things that come along with that for me. Is when millennials are not 12, we're in our 30s, our late 30s. And also we have a different relationship with work-life balance. We have a different relationship with boundaries. The press is furious with me that I'm having boundaries, and I don't care. And I'm I'm running for City Hall. I'm not running to be in relationship with you. And you can feel however you would like to feel about that. And I will only respond to email because I have things to actually do. And so I think that there's a lot there's things that I constantly learn from older folks and vice versa. Like, I think that's the really great thing about being able to be multi-generational, and also why we need to have more multi-generational vibe in City Hall. There, we need some younger folks that can, push some different ideas, is also to learn in that space, because truly it is going to be the millennials that are going to be taking over and stuff. And we need to start having these working relationships in important spaces like City Hall and state legislators, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of beauty in it. And, I'm not a baby.
Number two, let's see. Portland has a white supremacy problem here. What work have you done personally and professionally to dismantle white supremacist systems? How will you ensure the safety of your constituents of color when Patriot Prayer, or Proud Boy, and other white supremacist groups continue to gather and terrorize the city? I want to start with, maybe we'll start with candidate AJ. I'll say candidate because you're still running, see?
Yep, candidate AJ McCrary, running for seat number 2. The work that I've been doing both with Mom Block, Race Talks, and Equitable Giving Circle are all important work to help dismantle white supremacy norms and culture. Through Equitable Giving Circle, we are a reparations-based organization that does food justice, housing, and community wellness. And for food justice, we have 2 large-scale programs. In total, we serve about 375 families a week. One group, about 300, is from our food delivery, and the other is through our weekly pantry. This is a space that is just for BIPOC folks, for Black and Brown people, and really intentional to carve out that space and to offer long-term services and build relationships. There are a lot of organizations in town that do stuff. There's a lot of Black legacy organizations, but most of them don't focus on just food justice or direct impact now. They're doing larger systemic stuff. They're leaning into education. They're working on policy, which is all really important. So we're sort of now doing a little different part and getting to work with some of those folks, which is really amazing and exciting to carve out more space in Portland for Black and Brown folks, not less, because we need more. Our large scale community events is all about healing and creating space for Black and Brown folks, as well as we do education online through 3 different programs, and just for the community in general. And so I think that's a really big part of it. Mom Block is a mutual aid group, and it's just about Impact Now support, and really operates in a very mutual aid space. And I've been working, doing, development work, a lot of artwork, a lot of art activism for Black and Brown folks and carving out space. I'm on the board at STEPS, and it's really about bringing in money and creating more scholarships for Black ballet dancers. And, I love doing development work, and it's very, very intentional about having these development skills and really working within our community. Like, once I started in development, I had worked my way into that. I really was like, I just want to do this for Black and Brown folks. I want to do this for our community. And so I have, and I'm glad and grateful for that. And I definitely want to take that to a larger platform. And the thing about supporting Black and Brown folks is that everybody gets supported through that work. And Portland is such a small community of Black and Brown people that there's just a great opportunity for us to really heal, and then also be healing everybody along the journey. So I've been doing that work, and how am I going to help, shut down the Proud Boys and all of these different extremist groups. I mean, there's a lot of work that has to be done with that, both with working with our law enforcement, education, and also community conversations. I think that's something that we really should be leaning into at a larger level, like both with our neighborhood associations, just the City Hall in general. I'm definitely there should be this is a sanctuary city, which means that we've agreed that this is a place where we want to, for folks to be safe for a variety of different reasons. And we want to have the resources and the support for that. And that means that we have to actively, loudly say no to racist and extremist groups. I think that's also being able to work together as a city council to do that. And we have some folks on city council, Joanne, that are very loud and pushing back, and we have other people who are not. And so we need to make sure that we have people in that space that can rally behind, rally next to, you know, Joanne, who has done so much incredible work in City Hall over the last not even 40 years. It's
Right.
been amazing. Just to, you know, to help push back and to also help be the voice of reason and education, because I think those are all of some of the components in pushing back. And I'm sure there's things that I don't know that we can do that I will get to learn in real time. And there's, you know, but I'm definitely like, we cannot allow this, and we cannot be creating space, because right now when they're here, they're pushing, you know, they're showing up and starting stuff. Many folks in our local government are just allowing it or looking away or supporting it.
Commissioner Hardesty.
I appreciate AJ's words. Let me just say, in my 3 years and 4 months here at City Hall, we have seen white nationalists show up in our community in ways that have been absolutely terrifying. And as a child of the civil rights movement, I mean, when I was a kid, I saw the powers that be, police and sheriffs and other authority figures brutalizing people that looked like me because they were trying to get a good education, trying to move into good housing, trying to actually have economic independence. And so I grew up with that on the evening news every single night as a child. So that has always had a huge impact on me. Watching people who were supposed to protect and serve us all decide that their job was to protect white kids from having to sit next to Black kids in a classroom. And you would think that we'd come a long, long way since that time. And all it took was a crazy man, 45, to be in the highest office in the land. And what we learned is that what we thought we had won was actually a very, very thin protection, right? Because who knew we could undo 50 years of civil rights gains in one administration? And now there are other people that have lost their mind all over the country trying to take people's rights away. Now that I am in charge of PBOT, and this is something I recommended to the mayor when I did not have PBOT and did not have the police bureau. Now that I have PBOT, I would put the bridges up, and I would actually inconvenience everybody when I heard there was going to be a white supremacist rally. And I would make sure that every car that had a visible weapon was stopped and questioned and searched to ensure they had a concealed weapons permit. What I have seen in my time at City Hall is this kind of forgiveness of white supremacists. In fact, the police even show up differently. They show up very casually. In fact, there's lots of video if you just Google, but they kind of show up like they're going to a Sunday picnic when white nationalists protest.
Yeah.
But don't let them hear about a Black Lives Matters protest, and all of a sudden you got 20 people in riot gear, and 30 seconds after it starts, they declare a riot, right? So, so what I know is that we have a police force that I actually worked with the mayor to actually commission a study to determine how embedded white supremacy was within Portland Police Bureau, whether or not they were resistant to change, and whether or not there was racial disparities in how they policed in the city of Portland. I was extremely woefully disappointed when the OIR group came back with this milquetoast report that basically said, we can't answer your questions, but here are like 20 things that the police have been whining about that we think you can do to actually make policing better. I led the effort to have the council reject that report because there was no way I wanted that to be perceived as a document that the city would use as a model for moving forward. So the things we have to do is I actually had the entire council and all the directors at City Hall take a recognizing white supremacy symbols training that Western State Center put together for City Hall. I've also got money set aside to make sure that we train all city employees at being able to identify white supremacy symbols so that they know when they recognize them, how to actually report it and how to make sure that we do something about it. I sent the police chief about a year ago a picture of one of his vehicles that actually has a white supremacy sign and embedded in the logo, and it was on one of their trucks. And I sent the picture to Chief Lavelle and said, so who authorized this white supremacy symbol on the side of your Portland Police Bureau vehicle? I don't know. Well, what are you going to do to get rid of it and make sure that nobody actually does that again? And I'm happy to say that they have removed it. But I am still waiting for what was supposed to be a report from the mayor's office on what happened in August of 2021 when white supremacists were given permission to come and terrorize East Portland, the most racially diverse area in the city of Portland. And the police, even though they had required long hands on deck, they had 400 officers on duty, but didn't think they should actually send any of them other than 3 on a truck with a loudspeaker to address the white supremacists that were terrorizing and brutalizing people in my community. We were promised that there would be a report afterwards. Still waiting for it. Keep asking for it every month. When's that report? Oh, it's coming, it's coming. The good news is that the DOJ Civil Rights Division is continuing to keep their thumb on Portland Police Bureau to actually provide appropriate accountability for the 6,000 uses of force last year, in 2020 as part of the protest. I will end this by saying, if I had not been on council, the only thing that Black people would have gained at the height of the racial justice protest would have been a holiday called Juneteenth. But because I was here, we eliminated 3 of the most racially disparate outcome units in Portland Police Bureau. I was able to get my colleagues to support sending to voters a ballot measure to create the first independent police oversight board. By the way, by a vote of 82% of the public, they supported it. And so when people say I'm like radical and stuff, I actually know policy. I know how to get policy passed. I served in Salem, so I'm not new to how do you make public policy. But I also want to say it was 30 years of volunteer work on police accountability. So people say, oh, she just dreamed it up one night. No. It was 30 years of volunteer work that no one paid me for. And then when I came to City Hall, I came with those tools. And so I think one of the most important tools I have is a tool as a community organizer. Because what I know is if I want to pass policy, I need the community to be beating up on my colleagues to make sure that they are supportive of the policy that I want to pass. There was this perception before I got to City Hall that the mayor assigned you bureaus and you just kept your nose down and you only focus on the bureaus that the mayor assigned you. And that is not how I roll. I do not believe that my constituents live in bureaus. They live out in the real world, right? So I was never going to tell a constituent, well, I'm sorry, I can't deal with that issue because I've been assigned these bureaus and I can't actually have an impact anywhere else. I think the good news with the small donor program is it's actually allowed us to bust up this assumption about what the role of a city council member is. Other than the mayor, everyone else on council today was elected through the small donor program, which means we ask different questions. We have different priorities, and it makes a huge difference in the kind of policies that are moved forward. And remember, many of my colleagues are relatively new, and so they don't know what they don't know yet, and they're feeling their way through the process. But think about when I got here, and it was a totally white council, but me being elected made it a majority female council for the very first time in the history of the city of Portland. I could not have imagined when I got elected that 2 years later, a mere 2 years later, there'd be another Black male and a Latinx woman serving with me on the city council. And honestly, I think that's why the downtown business interest is terrified and trying to spend $700,000 to prop up a weak candidate, because that weak candidate doesn't have the breadth of experience that I do. But he's more appealing because he will regurgitate the party line about we need to put more money downtown Portland. So yes, it is good when the people elect the people to city council and not moneyed interests.
Mhm.
Good job.
Can we jump into that question? Let's talk
We're
about
gonna run out of time. There's a
Let's
lot
talk
to
about
talk
the
about.
money.
Oh, yeah, no,
Let's
this
talk
is
about
good.
the procurement process. So I need to call you by your title. We're friends in real life.
Hey, no, you can
all of
call me
us.
whatever you want to, Val. It's all
Commissioner
good.
Joanne, I've heard you say publicly, that just that very thing, that the business owners, downtown are very scared because you've been asking a lot of questions. AJ, conversely, I hear you say, math is easy. This is not a difficult concept for people to understand. So can you speak to us more broadly about what's happening with the procurement process, as well as the allocation for funding for accessible transportation? I had a very nicely fancy question. It's in the chat. You can see it. We
But
can
you're just
reference
jumping
it.
in.
I noticed
But we just, we amongst
it
friends,
did now.
so we just gonna jump in.
It's all good. I know we're
Yeah.
friends, so we
But
Oh,
don't
yeah.
have to be
mental and
so formal.
healthcare, the Portland response team, houselessness. I mean, all this ties back into resources, who is hired, who the city contracts with, how is that determined? So let's jump on
So
into
let
that.
me do a very short answer to that question, because otherwise we'd be here all night. Let me say, when I showed up, I was actually shocked to learn that we have 12 failed programs in procurement that are supposed to benefit minority and women-owned firms. And I can tell you, it made a lot of people uncomfortable when I showed up and I started saying, so how many Black people got contracts? How many Latinx people got contracts? How many women got? And in fact, even some of my colleagues, well, you can't ask that. Well, sure I can. Why else am I here if I can't ask who is receiving public dollars, right? The good news is we've hired a new procurement director, because I exhausted the last one and he had to go back to a safer job somewhere else. But in all seriousness, it is absolutely, in my view, intentional that what we do, and in fact, just today I voted no on a proposal because we have majority contractors that have mastered the art of actually subcontracting with only white firms and putting a $14,000 flagger in as their person of color. But it's a $4.5 million contract. And then prior to me being at the city hall, Citywood actually applauded because, we exceeded our MWESB goals and we have 23% MWESB. And so I said in my first month, every time you come to council, I'm going to ask you this question. So I need you to disaggregate that. Giving me an alphabet soup tells me nothing. And unfortunately, so 3 years and 4 months later, I can tell you that those systems were put in place intentionally, and they are working exactly the way they were supposed to work, which is to allow majority contractors to really game the system. In fact, it took a very quick Google search to find out one of the companies that continues to get these contracts with the city has been emerging for 28 years. I was like, when are you actually done? How do you become an emerging, a white contractor who's been an emerging small business for 20 years? Because there's no process at the state to actually say, after 10 years, if you haven't emerged, you're on your own, right? But they do that for Black contractors. They do that for women contractors. So the whole system is set up to actually have the outcomes that it has, which is, and I found it ludicrous that Black and brown people have to jump through all these hoops to get state certified, right? But the only beneficiary of that certification is the white primary contractor, because they don't have to actually do state certification, right? And so they get extra points because the people of color jump through all these hoops and given the state all their financial information, all their personal information, so that the white contractor gets more money. But there's nothing in the system that actually guarantees they will get the work, right? Because if they put the bid in and they got 14,000 for this
Right.
one flagger company, chances are they're going to be busy somewhere else when that work actually is ready to be done. And there's no penalty for actually not using the one or two minority people that you have. And so the good news is that with the new procurement director, Biko Taylor, he's been very intentional about both eliminating 6 of those 12 failed programs right off the bat, doing a new disparity study. And Bruce, you know how much I hate disparity studies because the 13 volume just sat on the shelf after we did it, like in the 90s, in the early 90s. But I supported him because he said this is what he needed to make the case for why we need to expand certification. Biko Taylor also has identified another organization that actually will certify minority contractors that really has expanded our pool beyond just Portland, up and down the I-5 corridor. And so I'm really excited about the potential to actually finally start getting the outcomes that the city has claimed under 4 different mayors. Each mayor comes in and creates their own program, and they're all colossal failures. So, but I'm more optimistic now with the new procurement director than I've been in quite some time.
AJ, I'm going to turn the question over to you about your thoughts about procurement and contracting and the budgets and just kind of what your perspective coming into this as a candidate.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a lot of opportunities to move us forward. As Commissioner Hardesty just mentioned, there aren't systems in place to really make sure that Black and brown folks, that actual small businesses, that women and femme folks, that queer folks are being prioritized. And I definitely have seen that in my work and felt that intentionally in my work. So I do think that there's a lot that we can do to move that forward, and to make sure that things are changing, because it is ridiculous that a lot of times a small business contract will go to, decades old organization that is not small. I think also intentionally, because this was something that Equitable Giving Circle faced during the pandemic, is we had won a large contract through OHA, which, the city was moving that money. And I told them straight up, like, this is great. And I don't know you. So I'm going to need to get that check on the front end. And everybody was shocked. They were like, wait, what? And I was told, AJ, they're going to cancel this. And I was like, no, they're not. They already publicly told people that we were getting this money. Like, they're not going to cancel it. Like, you got to understand strategy a little bit more, and we don't need to play nice. And it didn't take very much pushback. Like, they wanted to make sure, like, they wanted to be able, like, we're working with this new group, these young women. Like, there was all of this. This was the benefit to the city. And we were about to do something that they couldn't even wrap their heads around. And so in that, like, we did get funding on the front end. Now, actually, the city owes us money, and I have somebody who's like literally beating the door down to, like, I have to change one thing on this invoice, and it's my fault. It's not her fault, but she's like, based off of that experience, the original one, we've had such a different experience with getting paid out, with, like, don't play with us. I mean, literally, like, it's my fault, and I had apologized today. I was like, I'm so sorry. I totally, like, I'm moving, I forgot to send it to you. And, and so it has radically changed our experience. And it's something that people shouldn't have to ask for. The government has money. Just, it's not appropriate to ask small businesses, Black and brown organizations, queer organizations, any small entity to be fronting money for work, or, front the work and get the invoice on the back end. So there's something there that, like, I have a personal experience with, and it definitely needs to change, because in the old way and the way that most folks are engaging, it forces small businesses, Black and brown folks, queer folks, women and femme businesses or organizations to not be able to even take those contracts, right? It's like it becomes an immediate barrier. So I think there is lots of things that we can do. One, making sure that we're actually prioritizing the organizations and the businesses that we say we are, as well as making sure that we're paying in a way that is equitable, and working with folks in ways that are equitable, and making sure we also have whatever programming or support is needed. So there's a lot of conversation around PSEF to pump the brakes. And a lot of that is very racist. All of it's racist in the pump the brakes, and saying that organizations don't have the infrastructure or the experience. Okay, so if that's really how you feel, why aren't you offering extra support? Like then there was extra money, right? So there's extra money within the program. If this is really the concern, rather than stealing those dollars, build in that extra support that you insist is needed. And I guarantee actually it's not, because it's really not that difficult to hire an accountant. We have a bazillion in Portland. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can modernize and be intentional with the procurement processes, and also really lean into the equity lens in the way that we're working with folks. And those are systems that are widely known that need to be updated, modernized, addressed. And again, when we're bringing that equity lens in for Black and Brown folks, we end up supporting everybody, because intentionally making sure that we are supporting Black and Brown folks, we're also going to be, Portland is small and our numbers are small, right? So if there isn't a Black and Brown organization, there is a queer one, there is a women or femme owned one, or there is legit small business or small, you know what I mean? So setting up those safeguards will drastically change how the city's working, which will also drastically change how our economy is looking. Because if you prioritize the folks that actually make our society here in Portland tick, because Oregon is like 90 to 95% small businesses, we are going to see a huge difference in how we're able to grow and build and heal together. And that is the priority. And as we're coming out of this economic depression from COVID, like COVID is still happening, and it's still the situation. We're still in a global pandemic. And as we're trying to come out of that, it's going to be critical to intentionally support Black and Brown businesses and organizations, and build those relationships ongoing. Because if we build those relationships ongoing, it's also going to change how people invest in community and how they want to show up and participate. So yeah, a lot of that, it's all intertwined. It's like, there's no way to like silo these things. And I love that, Commissioner Hardesty talks about, doesn't matter if that's my bureau or not, that I'm going to speak on it, I'm going to ask questions, because all of these things are interconnected, whether it's, transportation, food justice, housing, job development, public safety. You can't piecemeal these. They're all interconnected. Our environment, that can go on through the whole long list of bureaus. We don't have time for that, but it's all interconnected.
Okay, AJ candidate. Remember that? You got to get that vote.
Seed number 2.
AJ, how have you planned to advance policies that support the well-being, health, safety, and wealth building for BBOC and QT plus communities?
So we
Well, I
might
think
need to break that acronym.
Did I do that by- did I use it?
Acronyms around all
Yeah,
night.
in line.
All over the place.
So BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color, and
Yes.
QT, Queer, Trans, plus so the LGBTQIA, 2S
All right.
communities.
Yeah, so I think, one of the things that I really am excited to work on is that procurement process, and making sure that we are really prioritizing Black and Brown, Indigenous, people of color, as well as folks from the queer community, and really intentional around that. I think part of being able to prioritize folks and make sure that we're getting support in our community is to work on that procurement process. Additionally, truly to be intentional about those long-term relationship building. There's something that has been affecting and plaguing nonprofits and folks doing community work for decades across the color line is the way that we're funding organizations. And it means the way that we're currently funding organizations is that we're making sure that people are chasing money, people that are good at feeding folks, or people that are good at doing social work or mental health services. Rather than doing that work, we're having folks look for funding that's not their skill set. And we need to change that. We need to be intentional building those long-term relationships, having multi-year grant processes, so that organizations can focus on their work and building those relationships with community, and then making sure that we're just funding those and keeping that going so that they're hyper focused on the work, and not so much looking for dollars. And that'll also change and influence how foundations are funding stuff, which ultimately overall, we'll start to see a different experience. And Portland being a sanctuary city, Portland being this very progressive place, it's really important that we're modeling those things. Urban development is taught out of here. This is supposed to be one of the most green, sustainable places in America. There's a lot of things that we've championed and we've talked about, and I think we got to sort of refocus on some of those. And part of that is prioritizing Black and brown folks. It is prioritizing small businesses. It is prioritizing how we're working and supporting queer folks. And so I think really it is both in the implementation as well as the policy. I think policy is really, really critical. And then it's really, it matters how it's implemented. If the implementation is not together, then it's nothing. And so we have people like, I will be coming in and learning a lot about policy, but I am an exceptional at implementation. And so that is the thing about me coming onto the city council that is going to be really great, is that I will have the space to learn about, policy. And I have a history, like a background in, history. So I understand reading and coming up with stuff and making plans. But I'm, a community organizer who knows how to implement. And that is something that we need a lot more experience in city council, particularly seat number 2. If we have somebody who is an implementer, we're going to be able to really move a lot of the care and a lot of the intentionality of the goals, both of our city and city council. So I'm definitely unapologetically going to be prioritizing our community, Black and brown folks, because I know through the work that I do in real time that everybody benefits, and it's going to drastically change our economy, which ultimately all of these business owners, that's what they want. They want more people to be able to come and spend money. Well, how you do that is that you intentionally make sure that you're supporting the folks that don't have that support.
Okay. Commissioner Hardesty, as the first Black woman on Portland City Council, can you tell us about your experience? What challenges have you encountered, and what achievements do you celebrate and will continue to do that day?
Well, let me just say that I am very proud of Portland Street Response, built from the ground up, a non-armed response to people suffering from mental health issues and behavioral health issues. That is a model on how I build programs. First, you go and talk to the people who need it most, which were the people who were houseless. Then you test it out. You build a big table. You invite everybody to be at the table. You have an independent independent audit to ensure that it's not me telling you what a great job I'm doing. It's somebody with some credentials and PhDs and other initials after their name telling you what a great job I'm doing. Let me also say the ballot measure to create the first of its kind police oversight, civilian oversight of our police force. And third, I'm most proud of passing the most advanced ban on facial recognition technology, both for the private and public sector. All those I did in my first term in office. And let me tell you, 911 had not changed in 150 years before I got here.
Do you have any final thoughts or anything that either of you would like to share with folks?
Well, one thing I wanted to actually pick up on, AJ was talking about like how people get access to dollars at the city of Portland. And I think PSEF is a good example of how you take grassroots community-based organizations and you provide them with training up front before they actually write an RFP. I can't tell you
Clarify what the
request for proposal. I'm sorry, yeah.
PSEF is
a Portland Clean Energy Fund. So as you know, I worked to get that put on the ballot. And again, voters approved it by over 60% percentage points. And as soon as COVID hit, there was this effort by both the business community and City Hall to raid the fund of PSEF, because what we thought would be a $30 to $40 million fund, all of a sudden we found out it's a $100 million fund, and everybody wants a piece of it. And you may hear me constantly as city council saying that is not your money. That money belongs to BIPOC communities. And unless you're partnering with BIPOC communities, you don't have access to that money. And I find it ironic that the mayor and others folks were trying to convince us to just toss money out the door because it's COVID and people need money. And I held firm with Sam Barrasso and said, no, we're going to make sure that we are good stewards of these dollars, right? Was a mistake made? Yes. But how many people build something from the ground up and don't actually make mistakes that need to be corrected along the way? And what I find interesting is that when white people build things from the ground up, they are allowed to make mistakes, do corrections to those mistakes, and then move forward. And I think BIPOC community members deserve that same kind of opportunity to learn from mistakes and do better the next time.
I have a final question. You know, a lot of people have been coming to Portland. This wasn't one of the pre-written questions, but a lot of people have been coming to Portland and are shocked at all the encampments that we have here. And obviously we've suffered a global pandemic. We're still in it. We see the rates going up, going down, you know. Is there an end in sight to this? Is there an opportunity for us to get folks off the street? And, you know, what can be done?
If there's bold leadership, I will say, you know, let me just say, Safe Villages will, at its best, actually accommodate 300 people. Well, we got 5,000 people living on our street and living in mobile homes, et cetera, et cetera. I think the solution is to land bank all the land the city currently owns and limit development to 60% of median family income, which most people don't know. Median family income in the city of Portland today, Portland metro area, is $94,900. And so
I'm definitely poor.
And let me also say that during COVID in the last 2 years, rents have gone up 40%. And I don't know how rents can go up 40% when we supposedly have a limit on rents going up only 10% per year. But miraculously, landlords figured out how to raise it 40% during COVID. And that's the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that the cost of living has not kept up with the cost of housing.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that and say, I mean, I definitely agree we need bold leadership in this space around how we're going to move this conversation. And the Safe Rest Villages, not only they don't serve very many people, make no dent in the situation, it also is a temporary solution. The Safe Rest Villages have a 2-year expiration date because the incumbent of the seat wants more data, which is very strange when Portland State, Multnomah County, and Metro have just released recent reports about who's houseless, what folks are asking for, what folks need. So we don't need new City of Portland research. We need to use some of the data and lean into that. And there are, you know, over 5,000 people that are houseless right now, and it's not a one size fit all in terms of story or situation. So not everybody who's houseless is an addict, and not everybody who's houseless is having a mental health crisis right now. But there are single mothers, there are single parents, there are young people, there are elders, there are multi-generational households that are, or families that are houseless, that we could be leaning into the 3,000 challenge, spearheaded by Urban League, Verde, quite a few other organizations. Equitable Giving Circle is on that list of supporters, to activate many of the thousands of units that are also available and empty in Portland. For every one houseless person, there are 2 units empty. So we need to, in addition to land banking, because that is critical and is part of the longer solution, like that is the pathway to a long-term solution. And so I want to not take away from that. And part of the immediate solution is to get some of these folks that are not in active crisis, who are just in a crisis, in housing and supported with wraparound services brought to them and get things moving, while we also work with Metro and the county to make sure that we start having long-term addiction services, long-term mental health services, because we got to do multiple things at once. So we've got to be addressing, like, how can we move a majority of people forward quickly and get them on their way and supported? How do we create long-term solutions for permanent housing and permanent solutions? Also, how do we build out the support for folks who are in, mental health or addiction crisis right now? So it is a multiple thing has to happen at once. And since it's not a one shoe fits all, we can't just be like Safe Rest Villages, this is the solution. The thing with the Safe Rest Villages is let's get these people out of sight, out of mind. Let's have a temporary solution. And it's really strange too to even talk about them in terms of this is about services first. These Safe Rest Villages are near no services.
Let me also say a lot of our houseless people work, and some of them work 2 jobs. They
Yeah.
just can't afford first, last, security deposit, and pet rent
That
to live
part.
in the city of Portland. And most working people don't have $5,000 to $7,000 to move into a unit. The last thing is we have to stop allowing developers to pretend they're building affordable housing. When I first got to city council, every developer that showed up at council was building affordable housing. And until I asked the question, affordable for who?
Right.
And then they would kind of stumble. And then I would say, well, what's the median family income? And most of the time it ended up being at 80% of median family income, which means you need to make about $72,000 to $75,000 to qualify for their affordable 1-bedroom unit. And I've encouraged them to call that worker housing. Let's not pretend that's affordable. There's nothing affordable about that at all.
Right.
But it is good housing for professionals, but it is not going to help with our houseless crisis.
Or
No, I
for
really-
working families. There's no housing for, like, as a single parent, need a 2-bedroom. I looked for a space that wasn't a shoebox for 7 months.
I believe you.
That's
Wow.
ridiculous.
One real
Yeah.
quick note, I would say, I want to thank, again, I want to thank the Race Talk for inviting me to be a part of this session. I think it was great. I think we need to continue doing this. I'm sure both of you ladies admit the fact that we are living in a crisis right now here in this area. And as the old
Yeah.
saying goes, it's going to take the entire village, if you will, to come out of this situation that we're in right now. So thank you very, very much for being part of this. And hopefully you guys will be that sitting up in that sitting up in those chairs and those biases. And we
Well,
got,
we know they ain't going nowhere. So,
Sure are.
so hey,
I'm old. I ain't going nowhere.
I
making
know
noise
I'm old.
and rattling the cages and, keeping folks on their toes regardless. So, as mom has always said to you, Joanne, and I say this and echo the sentiment, as long as I have a space, you both have a space in
Yes.
it with me.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I'm honored to know you and be in space and community with you. And Mr. Bruce, thank you for inviting Race Talks to join the Voter Digest to have this extended conversation around the candidates and creating space for 2 Black women running for city council in Portland. Like, oh my gosh, it's amazing.
And can
Let's
I
do it
just say
again.
how much I've
Good luck.
enjoyed getting to know AJ during this election cycle? I knew of the Giving Circle and the Mom Block, but I had no idea the person behind it. And I just want to say that I knew of AJ's work before I ever met AJ. And when we met, we ended up like talking for a couple hours and could have talked for a couple of days nonstop. So I look forward to us deepening that relationship because we have to be the role models for the folks that are coming behind us. And I am enthused that there are so many Black people who are stepping into this space now because they've seen me, they've seen AJ step out there at a time when, it was late in the game. And I just want to publicly just admire AJ for just the fact that she stepped in, right? Like she
Awesome,
just
AJ.
all in, right? Early on. And that's important, right? And it's important for other Black people to see that there's no shame in actually stepping up and win or lose, putting everything you have into it. And then continuing to do the work. Because guess what, AJ, you got a long future in this town if you want it. And I'm just so proud to get to know you. And Bruce, you and I have known each
thank
other
you.
way too long. We'd be
Yes.
telling our ages if we
Yes.
started talking about how long we've known each other. That's right.
Well, I want to say thank you, Mr. Bruce. Thank you, Race Talks. Thank you, Shayna. And thank you, Joanne. I really appreciate all of you. Like, Shayna's been a mentor and a friend of mine for quite some time. And I know that both you, Mr. Bruce, and Commissioner Hardis, you've done so much work in our community and laid the groundwork. And so, yes, I did jump in this race late, and it's because of folks that have come before me and have also, laid the groundwork. None of my work is my own. It is picking up the legacies, the thoughts, the experiences, the knowledge of other folks and, implementing it. So it's an honor to be in space with y'all, and I'm excited to continue to learn and keep growing these legacies and making, good change for our community, because at the end of the day, that's the goal.
Awesome.
In true Black
Awesome.
folks fashion, we have given the 5-minute goodbye.
Good thing none of us are ministers, otherwise you'd be here another half
I heard
hour.
that. I heard that. Shauna,
All
awesome
right,
job.
y'all. Thank
Where's
you so
Mom?
much.
Thank
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you, Mom.
evening, good people.